Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're well. You amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. It's Friday, baby. It's Friday. Is it Friday? Yeah, it is Friday. You're looking absolutely amazing, I must add. And in this video, we're going to get straight into the meat and potatoes as we're now in the aftermath of Wednesday's hearing, where we saw Judge Hippler spend the vast majority of the hearing holding his head on like it was only held on by Velcro and it needed the extra support of his hands until the prosecution spoke. Then he kind of, it seemed to hold itself on. It was only when the defense spoke that he seemed to have some form of difficulty with his head being firmly attached to his shoulders. But anyway, that's by the by. We're going to talk about the media aftermath and then just raise some questions, because obviously in the aftermath of what we saw, what we heard, a lot of attention has been focused on Ann Taylor. And the question has been raised that is Ann Taylor just merely throwing as much shit at the wall as she can and seeing how much of it sticks? Or does Ann Taylor have a strategy? Is there a strategy there? And again, I raised in a video that I did yesterday a question because I felt that she had made one statement that, for me, I found concerning. But let's just see exactly how the media are treating Wednesday's hearing, shall we? So this is what we got. Yeah, I know, the Daily Mail, the Daily Fail. But to be fair, it's pretty much the same across the board. It's the same story, whoever you read it from. It says Bryan Kohberger looks set to suffer a major blow in the fight for his life after an Idaho judge said he would likely deny the 11th hour bid to delay his capital murder trial. In one of two critical hearings held in Ada County Courthouse Wednesday, Judge Stephen Hippler heard arguments over the accused mass killer's request to postpone proceedings based on his claims that a recent Dateline episode and other publicity had thwarted his right to a fair trial. While Hippler said he would take the matter under advisement, which is something that I pretty much called out. I knew that was going to happen. I'm just wondering, because obviously Stephen Hippler is becoming a bit of an internet sensation streaming on YouTube, whether he will start doing his own merchandise. Because if he does, we know exactly what his t-shirt shall read on the front: take the matter under advisement. And issue a written order at a later date. He revealed his skepticism for the defense's argument. Did he reveal his skepticism, or did he simply say, I'll take the matter under advisement? Hippler told both sides he would fully encourage everyone to continue as if the trial is going to take place when it is scheduled for. I would tell you it's likely you're going to trial on the date indicated, he said. Now, following more than 2 years of legal wrangling, delays, and the trial being moved to another county, it appears likely that Kohberger is finally heading to trial this summer. Jury selection is currently slated for late July through to early August, while opening statements will begin August 11th. Kohberger was accused of killing Xana Kanoda, Ethan Chapin, Kelly Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, a stab and rampage inside an off-campus student home in Moscow, Idaho on November 13th, 2022. Then we have various pictures. We don't need to go through too much of this. It just says if convicted, he faces a death penalty, which is due to changes in Idaho law. It means he could face the firing squad. Which, yeah, do you know what I mean? It's we know that there's been some things changed. You know, the trial has been moved. Why was the trial moved? The trial was moved because it was determined that there was sufficient enough bias in the community that the fair trial could likely be affected by that. And ultimately, they have, and Bryan Kohberger has a right to a fair trial. And that is as simple as that. So you could ask yourself, what's changed? What has changed since when it was moved to where it is now? Has the bias in the community likely to have subsided? Has it got worse? The argument is always going to be, will it ever get better? Is it simply that the longer we delay this, the more that stories are going to come out? Is it in fact going to become harder and harder as time progresses for Bryan Kohberger to actually get a fair trial? And if that's the case, then should it be considered, even at this stage, if that's the case, that Bryan Kohberger is likely to not get a fair trial? And what does that mean in terms of ramifications for the trial itself and his making his way through the process, so to speak? You know, he deserves a fair trial, regardless of how anybody feels about the guy. He's entitled to a fair trial. Now, the last hearing that we heard, you know, and the documentation that we saw in the aftermath of that I went through yesterday, which I believe was obviously prepared before that hearing. You know, Ann Taylor made a good argument, and that is that she wasn't asking for simply the Dateline situation to be taken into consideration. It wasn't about that. And, you know, people have turned around and said that Ann Taylor's had 2 years to get herself ready, 2 years plus. But they fail to recognise the ever changing situation that she's facing. You know, nothing in terms of what is coming her way has remained consistent. And we're going to talk about that in video 2 later today, as I caught a Heather Fitzgerald post yesterday. And I think it's very important that we just take a moment to understand that that's what Ann Taylor is up against. It hasn't remained consistent. So when something happens and it changes the landscape of the trial, then she has to then deal with those changes. And these changes have been consistent throughout. And again, we'll talk about these later on today. But I have seen a lot of people in the comments who have questioned the integrity of Ann Taylor, the strength of Ann Taylor. Does Ann Taylor have a plan? Again, my issue with what Ann Taylor had said was Ann Taylor had almost said Bryan Kohberger isn't going to get a fair trial. We don't think he's going to get a fair trial. We've got this incoming Publicity that we know on the 11th of July, this 4-part docuseries, and that is off the back end of this already damaging Dateline one. And we also have, in the midst of all that, a leak from either the prosecution or law enforcement, and this leak seems to have the intention to damage the trial, to damage the public perception of Bryan Kohberger. And in all honesty, it does seem like that has happened. Unless you're an idiot, you can't deny that that has happened. And it would appear that the prosecution and even the judge wants to ride that wave. And that is concerning. The issue that I had with Ann Taylor is that Ann Taylor would then seemingly suggest that if the death penalty was taken off the table, then that would somehow change things. And I've stepped back and kind of listened to some of the comments, and people have kind of said, yeah, but that changes the amount of work that she has to do. You know, if it's not a capital case, then there is less mitigation, there is less work, there is things that she then doesn't have to consider. But what she does have to consider is the fact that if you're going with this is not going to be a fair trial, we have just seen the aforementioned publication released into the public. We have upcoming publication, as again aforementioned, on the 11th of July, that is going to further push the public into feeling a certain way about Bryan Kohberger. Well, just because this isn't a capital case, it doesn't mean that this trial is going to be any more or less fair. That the trial is going to be the trial. The jury is going to be a jury of Bryan Kohberger's peers that, regardless of, again, whether this is capital or not, are going to be susceptible to seeing and being affected by these various things that have come out in the public. So, you know, can we fully trust Ann Taylor? And I think to myself, that ultimately doesn't matter, because we are not the ones that are on trial. We're not the ones who have to trust Ann Taylor. Bryan Kohberger has to trust Ann Taylor, and ultimately he is in a financial position. His family are in the financial position where they have no alternative but to trust in Ann Taylor. So I suppose the question is there another public defender who would likely be able to do a better job than Ann Taylor? And I think at this stage, we have to remain steadfast in our feelings that she's good at her job. She's good at her job. I don't think that this is just a case of Ann Taylor throwing as much at the wall as she can. I believe that Ann Taylor is someone who has had to change, has had to adapt, as consistently we have seen the stories change, we have seen things being withheld from her, we have seen her being accused consistently of being the antagonist of the aforementioned delays and issues, when in actuality it hasn't been her. She has been asking and asking and asking for discovery to the tune of around 25, 26 requests for such, and she is still awaiting on certain things to be handed over. And, you know, the only story that seems to have stayed and remained constant is that of the accused Bryan Kohberger. But again, we'll cover that in video 2. But I want you to let me know down below, do you trust Ann Taylor? Has your faith wavered in Ann Taylor's ability? And if it has, then please let me know down below whether it has. And if it hasn't, then again, let me know down below that it hasn't, and exactly what has allowed you to remain confident in her abilities. Me, still, I must admit that there's just a niggling feeling in the back of my mind that there has been for a long period of time. But is she the best that Bryan Kohberger ultimately can get? Maybe that is the point, that yes, she is. Love you all, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Mwah.